As gospel stories go, the account of the Magi actually gives us quite a bit of information. We have the whole narration of their arrival in Jerusalem, the dialogue with the king, the moving them to Bethlehem, the presentation of the gifts, the appearance of a dream that warns them, and then returning by a different route. There's a lot there to the story. The one thing that is not there is their reaction to seeing the Christ child, the newborn king, with Mary, his mother. We have a sense from the gospel. This is not entirely what they expected. They set out following a star because they had heard of the prophecy that the newborn king, the King of Kings, would be born in this way. And so at the star's rising, they set out from their various places. They were astrologers, not necessarily religious people. But they were going in search of the truth. And the star precedes them to this place called Israel. And they may have had an idea of who this people was, but fine. Off they go. And so they arrive there, and what do? Well, they're looking for a king. So they go to Jerusalem and present themselves at the palace and say, "Where is the newborn king?" Herod wasn't so sure about this. And so he sends them on. And the story relates that they were overjoyed at seeing the star come to rest over Bethlehem. They were overjoyed at seeing the star. It doesn't say they were overjoyed at seeing the child when they entered the house. It must have been completely beyond their expectations to find a newborn king, he who was to be the King of Kings, living in poverty. Living with this poor woman, his mother, and this carpenter, his father. Far from the palace, far from the halls of power. And yet, they kneel, they prostrate themselves, they open their treasuries, and they present him with their gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. This is an invitation to all of us to think about our own expectations about God, about religion, about church. Because we all have them. We all have expectations, images in our mind of who God is and how God is supposed to behave. Sometimes those expectations, those images in our mind are even stronger than the ones we have about ourselves or one another. We kind of structure our whole worldview, our whole life of faith around what we think God should be doing and how he should be responding. We say, for example, well, I've prayed for that, but I don't see any answer here. Or we think that, why does God allow that person to be sick? Or why does God allow this thing to happen to that family? Or to me, for that matter? Because the way that God shows himself, the way that God answers your prayer, and God answers every prayer, does not conform to our expectations. And so we feel ignored. We feel distant from time to time from God. But that sense, those feelings, they're true feelings, but they're not responding to God in God's self. They don't respond to who God really is. They respond with the disappointment that arises when God does not conform himself to our expectations. And yet, if you were to take the whole of Scripture, from the beginning right through to the end, all of them, Abraham, Moses, Sarah, the prophets, Elijah, right through the New Testament, God never, ever shows himself, reveals himself in the way that those people expect him to. Moses did not expect to find God in a burning bush in the desert. Far less that he, with a speech impediment, was going to be sent to Pharaoh to barter for the freedom of the people of Israel. Elijah went in search for God, the greatest prophet of the Old Testament. And he searched for God, it says in Scripture, in the raging fire, in the wind that was so strong that it smashed boulders before it, in the surging of the waves of the sea as it pounded upon the seashore. And he did not find God in any of those things. And then Elijah was standing at the entrance to his house, and he heard a small whispering breeze. And he knelt down and hid his face because God was in the breeze. All of these are ways of saying that God continues to reveal himself, to show himself, but not in ways that we would expect or imagine. The whole point of the Epiphany is a word that means revelation, showing, is that God desires to be shown, to be known, to be in a relationship with you and me. And so that means, and we profess this in the Creed, that God continues to reveal himself to us every single day. He continues to make himself known. Now you may think, well, sure, okay, that sounds nice, but I don't experience that. I don't feel that in my life. I don't see how God is making himself known. Yeah, sure, I can point to various occasions and various moments in my life where I have felt maybe the particular closeness of God or the action of grace in some way. But every day, come on, that's the overstated. Come on, see? You cannot be in a relationship with an idea. Can't do it. And what the Lord desires of us is to draw us deeper into a relationship with him so that he may reveal to us who he really is. And in that, he reveals to us who we ourselves really are. We become more authentically ourselves the closer we draw to him. And our relationships, all the other people that God has put in our lives, those become all the more authentic as well, the closer we draw to the Lord. But you cannot be in a relationship with an idea. So just as we are in relationship with all sorts of other people, God reveals himself personally every single day. Because it's the only way you get a relationship to grow. And if we don't see it, and if we don't feel it, well, then what I'm proposing to you, the gospel proposes to you this morning is, it's not because God isn't showing himself. The problem lies elsewhere. It lies in ourselves. Sin and our sinful inclinations keep us from seeing God, which is why we are always called to conversion, to confession, to that putting ourselves at the disposition of grace and virtue in order to be able to see and recognize God's action more authentically in our lives. And our own imaginings of who God is and how God should behave get in the way a lot too. And so we have to, in some sense, continually take a step back and recognize simply the fact that God is going to show himself to me today. Try that for your morning prayer. God is going to show himself to me today. It's not going to be in a way that I expect. So, O Lord, open my eyes to recognize you when you come. And he will, because he does. When we content ourselves to our own images of who God is and, well, how God should behave, what we do is we take the immensity of God and we make him very small. We try to make God fit our expectations. And when he doesn't, well, we blame him for that. He's not speaking to me. God is out there remote in his high heaven. But what St. Paul says again and again in his letters when he's writing to those early Christians, those first Christians, trying to figure out in a very hostile world how to be disciples of Jesus, again and again St. Paul says, look, all that God is doing is infinitely greater than what you can think or imagine. So let God be God. Let God surprise you. Let God reveal himself to you in the small things, in the little interactions with people at the grocery store, or at work, or in your own family. Let God be God. He continues to show himself, to reveal himself, that you might know him and know his love for you, so that you may love him and be drawn into a personal relationship with the Lord. He revealed himself in the weakness and the fragility of a tiny baby held in the arms of his mother. Was it what the Magi expected? No, certainly not. And yet when they beheld it, these men, who may or may not have even been religious, recognized the truth. That what God was revealing to them was true. That some way, this tiny baby in the backwater of Bethlehem, in poverty, that woman, that man, that's the King of Kings. And so they dropped to their knees and opened their treasuries and presented him with their gifts. You and I are invited to the same thing. To search God as he really is, not as we imagine him to be. To know God and recognize God in the action of grace every day, not in our imaginings of how he should behave or respond to our prayers. Because whatever we think God should be doing, we can be sure that what he is doing is infinitely more than what we could ask or imagine. So search for the truth. Pray for the grace to recognize the Lord when he comes. Because this is the epiphany, the showing, the revelation, in order that we might know and love him as he knows and loves us. And when we do, and when we draw near, in Holy Communion and in the little things of daily life, in your hearts, do what the Magi did. Recognize the truth and adore it.